And good evening, everyone. Welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. As protests continue and calls for change get louder and louder, an emotional plea on Capitol Hill today from the brother of George Floyd.
Please listen to the call I'm making to you now, to the calls of our family and the calls ringing out the streets across the world. People of all backgrounds, genders, and races have come together to demand change. George wasn't hurting anyone that day. He didn't deserve to die over $20. I'm asking you, is that what a black man is worth? $20?
Mr. Floyd testified today before the House Judiciary Committee during its oversight hearing when it comes to policing. Now, he was referring to the reason that George was arrested, again allegedly, for a counterfeit $20 bill at a convenience store. Congresswoman Karen Bass, who's chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, she also spoke at the hearing, and she described Justice in Policing Act that the House and Senate Democrats rolled out this week.
This bold, transformative legislation would help reimagine the culture of policing while holding accountable those officers who failed to uphold the ethic of serving and protecting their communities. If this had been a law last year, George Floyd would be alive because chokeholds would be banned. Breonna Taylor would be alive because no-knock warrants for drugs would be banned. Tamir Rice would have graduated high school this May because the officer that killed him, had been fired from a nearby department, and he lied on his application. But this legislation calls for a national registry, so that would not have happened, and Tamir Rice would have graduated high school.
As we know, for this proposal to actually become law, it needs support from both parties, and Democrats are trying to get that elusive support from their colleagues across the aisle. Take a listen to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and what he had to say today on that.
Americans who took to the streets have demanded change. With this legislation, Democrats are heeding their call. Now is the time for Leader McConnell to commit to putting police reform on the floor of the Senate before July 4th to be debated and voted on. Several Republicans have acknowledged egregious wrong, but too few have expressed a need for floor action. Too many remain silent.
Senate Republicans, they're working on their own proposal. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he tapped South Carolina Senator Tim Scott to take the lead. It should be noted, Scott is the only African-American Republican in the Senate. Now, we're also getting some new poll numbers, and I think they give us an interesting snapshot about how people feel about policing right now. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans say that the killing of George Floyd is a sign of a broader problem, and it wasn't just an isolated incident. Also, the vast majority of the American public do not support the defunding of police departments. Only 16% say they support that proposal. And the final poll I'm going to show you, it asks whether or not police are using too much force against protesters. 50% say they're using the appropriate amount, and 44% say the police are using too much force. All right, for more, I want to bring in our first guest tonight, Congressman Patrick Maloney. He, a Democrat who represents part of New York's Hudson Valley. And Congressman, we went through all the numbers. The public really wants, in large numbers, meaningful police reform. Do you think they're going to get it from Washington? I know what the Democrats in the House are behind, but what do you think you're going to find when you go to the Senate, let alone the White House?
Well, I'm encouraged. I was in Central Orange County last night. 400 or 500 people turned out for a rally with Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's in Central Orange County, New York, and something is happening out there. People want real change. They want real reform. You see it happening at the state level. But in Washington, we're going to pass a sweeping bill out of the House that will include real changes, banning chokeholds, banning racial profiling, mandating dashboard cameras and body cameras, national registry of misconduct, better data gathering. There's a lot of important steps, and we need the Republicans to join us. I am encouraged that Mitch McConnell is making the right noises, but we need action.
Do you think with what we saw, Congressman, at Lafayette Park, and what the president most recently said about that 75-year-old protester in Buffalo, that in some ways it's making it easier for Republicans to cross the aisle and join you on this? Is the president, in a bizarre way, becoming a unifying force here for people to say, you know, I don't want to be aligned with that?
Well, Lincoln said that public sentiment is everything. And I think right now what you're seeing is an overwhelming desire by the American people across all our lines of difference for real change. We don't want any more George Floyds. We don't want any more of the hundreds of instances like that most people have never heard of. And there are common sense things we can do to improve policing, increase accountability, and support good, honest, community-based police departments. That's the opportunity we have here, and that'll be better for all of us. And that public sentiment is unlike anything I've seen in a long time. It is changing the debate. It's like, I think, when we saw attitudes shift very radically on something like LGBT marriage, or something that just a little while earlier had been a different kind of politics. Right now, there seems to be a broad consensus that we don't want to see any more George Floyds, and we want to support good cops, but we want real change. And it is a systemic problem. You are going to have to make sweeping systemic changes. And by the way, not just in policing, but in all the areas where we continue to be plagued by racial disparities, and they're real.
And that brings me to the next question, which is, and Governor Cuomo said it yesterday at length in his press conference, it's not just the policing. When it comes to housing, when it comes to education, when it comes to opportunity, it's not even close to a level playing field. So I remember after Sandy Hook and the tragedy that some people said, let's try and have as broad a meaningful reform when it comes to guns in this country. Others said, you got to take this in smaller increments if you want to have any change. And consequently, at the end of the day, very little changed on the federal level. It was left to the states. Do you think, because of the public sentiment, now would be the time to get really meaningful, broad reform beyond just policing? Or do you think you should just focus on policing because that's the best chance you'll have to get something done?
Well, I think we want to do what we can do, obviously, right now in the most urgent area in response to the tragedy in Minnesota. But no, that shouldn't be the end of it. And we should be building public support as we go. We should be making the argument that all of us will be better off if we live in a society that has more racial justice in it. If we can finally realize the founding ideals. And we just have never done that. And we have never really taken it on. And it's going to take all of us. And it's going to be an opportunity. And that's what I really want to tell people out there, is that we are going to be a better country the way we're a better country because we don't have slavery. We're a better country because we don't have Jim Crow in the South. We're a better country because more people can participate now, but we're not there yet. And so we can go to a higher place where we don't see a pandemic with extraordinary disparities in whose lives it's taking by zip code or by racial demographics, where we don't see such disparities in education, in housing, in jobs, and in incomes. We can do better, and it is not at someone's expense. We can do this together in a way that will make us all better.
In a perverse way, as we're talking about the changes that need to happen, places like New York, for example, are going to have to take an axe to their budgets if the federal government doesn't come through with the state aid. And I'm not sure people realize the kind of cuts it'd be to first responders like police. It would be to teachers. It would be to even hospitals while we're in a pandemic. Give an idea to the public, use your district if you want, just how deep and pronounced some of the cuts would be if Washington doesn't come through on the state aid.
Oh, it's a ticking time bomb. I mean, talk to the Republican county executives in my part of the world, in Dutchess County and Orange County, or George Latimer, the Democrat in Westchester, will tell you the same thing. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that have been taken out of those budgets because the sales tax revenue has evaporated and because their expenses and the services they've had to provide have gone through the roof. It's just math. And our legislation, the HEROES Act, would provide hundreds of millions of dollars directly to the counties, $32 billion to the state, but another $30+ billion directly to municipalities and counties. That would be $500 million over the next 2 years just to Westchester. By the way, we would also give people back their full state and local property deductions, which were taken away a few years ago. That would be a big deal. We support mass transit with $3.8 billion of new money for Metro North. And we provide hundreds of millions of dollars, billions in fact, to K-12 education. And finally, we support our hospitals. So healthcare workers, hazard pay, hospitals, better testing, but also mass transit, also restoring people's tax deductions and helping state and local governments who would otherwise have to lay off the very people who are on the front lines.
It's absolutely insane. You sit on the Intelligence Committee. I saw a story that reminded me of the days of Nixon here. Is the Pentagon spying on peaceful protesters exercising their constitutional rights?
Well, it's a sad statement that we even have to ask that question. But Chairman Schiff, who is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee on which I serve, wrote a letter this week raising those questions without prejudging it, but saying we want to understand if the military was used to clear peaceful protesters on the streets of Washington, did we also use the assets of the U.S. intelligence community? And if so, which ones? And that's a very serious matter if you start having the intelligence community, effectively supporting U.S. military action on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens. So here's hoping it didn't happen, but we want answers.
And we look forward to hearing them. Congressman, as always, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the first African American to become mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota. He'll join us, Melvin Carter. He'll discuss policing, the protests, and also his interesting backstory that's prepared him for this job during this difficult time.